The vast expanse of space stretched before humanity like an uncharted wilderness, a frontier yet to be fully conquered. After centuries of exploration, Earth had joined the galactic community, cautiously at first, dipping its toes into the waters of interstellar diplomacy. The first contact had been peaceful, even if tentative. The Teverii, a race of towering beings with hardened exoskeletons and warlike tendencies, had welcomed humanity with a measured sense of superiority. To the Teverii, humans were little more than an insignificant species, primitive in comparison to their own advanced technologies, and nothing more than a pawn in the galactic chess game they played. But humanity had a strength the Teverii could not have predicted. It was a quiet power, not in their advanced tech, not in their sprawling empire, but in their sheer will to survive and adapt. The Teverii, as it turned out, had underestimated the one quality that made humans unique: their resilience. For years, the Teverii had treated humanity as little more than an expendable asset. Colonies were established on distant planets, mining operations stripped entire moons of their resources, and human settlements were used as tools for the Teverei's ambitions. The humans, bound by their need to thrive and expand, followed orders without question. At least, that's what the Teverii thought. It began with whispers. Small groups of resistance fighters formed, their movements covert at first, but growing steadily in influence and numbers. They were inspired by the Teverei's arrogance, how they never thought that a species so primitive could have the capability to challenge their empire. And in that arrogance, the Teverii made one fatal mistake: they underestimated the will of humanity. The first rebellion came from the outer colonies, worlds abandoned by the Teverii, but filled with humans who had lived long enough without direct control to discover their own strength. It started small: sabotage, covert attacks, hit-and-run tactics. The Teverii ignored it at first, chalking it up to minor skirmishes, nothing worth deploying resources over. But it didn't stop. It grew. It spread. When Earth's leadership learned of the rebellion's success, they were stunned. The idea of humans, working together in secret, finding a way to turn the tables on their alien overlords, was something they'd never imagined. The United Earth Council, a collection of the world's strongest governments, had long held onto the hope that humanity's destiny lay beyond the stars. But now they saw it, their chance for freedom. The resistance fighters weren't just a flash in the pan. They had power. They had cunning. They had the heart to take on an empire that had thought them beneath notice. Earth's military response was swift and decisive. The global forces that had been gathering in secret for years were called to action. Under the leadership of General Alex Kor, a strategist as brilliant as he was ruthless, humanity's forces began striking at the heart of the Teverei's infrastructure. The rebellion took on a new shape: a full-scale war. It was no longer a matter of sabotage. It was a matter of survival. The Teverii, accustomed to ruling through fear and force, initially believed the rebellion was a fleeting nuisance. They sent in their warships, their elite troops, and their best commanders. But no matter how hard they struck, humanity pushed back. The Teverei's greatest weapon, their overwhelming technological advantage, began to falter in the face of human ingenuity. In the heart of the conflict, a pivotal moment arrived. The Teverii had long controlled a key galactic nexus, an ancient station that served as a central hub for the galaxy's trade routes and communication networks. It was also where the greatest of their fleets were stationed, poised to crush any resistance. General Kor and his forces launched their most daring strike yet, a full assault on the nexus, aimed at disabling the Teverei's command structure. The battle was brutal, and humanity lost many, but they managed the impossible, bringing down the station, crippling the Teverei's military infrastructure. The symbolic victory reverberated throughout the galaxy, sending a message that was impossible to ignore. The Teverii, faced with the sudden collapse of their grip on the galaxy, scrambled. They had never anticipated that the humans, with their relatively primitive weapons, would be able to challenge them so effectively. The surprise of humanity's power was not just in their capacity to fight, it was in their ability to learn, to adapt, and to endure. In the midst of this chaos, the Teverii sought to quell the rising tide of human rebellion through negotiation. They extended offers of peace, promises of autonomy to those worlds they had oppressed for so long. They offered resources, territories, and technology in exchange for humanity's submission. But General Kors saw through their hollow gestures. The Teverii weren't seeking peace, they were seeking to buy time, to regroup, to rebuild their shattered empire. And he wasn't having it. What followed was the turning point of the war. General Kors, with a coalition of Earth's finest minds and warriors, formulated a plan that would shake the galaxy to its core. The Teverii had always relied on their advanced weapons systems, but Kors knew their arrogance would be their downfall. If they wanted to keep humanity down, they had to break humanity's spirit. And yet, humanity's spirit had only grown stronger in the face of adversity. Humanity would not kneel. They would not submit. They would not be cowed into complacency. They would rise. Under the cover of night, in the darkest reaches of space, humanity launched its final, most audacious strike. They infiltrated the Teverei's strongest defenses, a fortress moon orbiting a dying star, and there, amidst the ruins of Teverii history, they discovered something even more terrifying, a weapon capable of wiping out entire fleets in a single, devastating strike. A weapon that could erase the Teverei's very existence from the stars. The humans, having learned everything they could from the Teverei's mistakes, were now poised to unleash their own devastating force. But instead of using it to destroy, they turned it into a message, a declaration that would echo throughout the galaxy. We are not your slaves. We are not your puppets. You wanted us to kneel. Now you will beg for mercy. The message was broadcasted across the galaxy, sent through every communication network the Teverii had built. And as the Teverii leaders listened to those words, they realized the truth: they had failed. They had underestimated humanity's resilience, its capacity for unity, and its will to survive. Kral, the Teverii High Commander, stood on the bridge of his flagship, his hands trembling as he watched the transmission. The message was clear. The humans had the power now. They had not only won the war, they had taken control of the galaxy's fate. Kral had always believed that the Teverii were the galaxy's true rulers, that no one could rival their might or intelligence. But humanity had proven him wrong. The Teverii had spent centuries conquering, subjugating, and enslaving, and now it was they who would kneel before the very species they once considered inferior. Desperate, Kral and his council called for an emergency meeting. The words spoken by the humans echoed in their minds like a death knell. The Teverii were no longer the galaxy's dominant force. The tides had shifted. Why didn't we see this coming? Kral muttered, his voice cold and bitter. There is nothing left for us now, his advisor replied. The humans have destroyed us, not just our fleets, but our very pride. We were wrong. They will never kneel to us. The realization settled like a weight upon Kral's chest. They had lost everything. The fearsome Teverii Empire had crumbled, their advanced fleets reduced to rubble, their once immovable power shattered. Now, they had only one choice: surrender. The once proud Teverii rulers had been brought to their knees not by the force of another empire, but by the one species they had sought to crush beneath their heel. The galaxy now belonged to humanity, and the Teverii, humbled and broken, had no choice but to beg for mercy. We must send an envoy, Kral said, his voice hollow with defeat. We must meet with them. We must beg for mercy. For our survival. As the Teverii prepared for their inevitable capitulation, the fleet of human ships assembled at the edge of their territory. The tables had turned. The war that had once been a struggle for freedom had now become the means by which humanity had claimed its place among the stars, and the Teverii were left with nothing but the bitter taste of their own hubris. And when the Teverii delegation arrived at the human command ship, there was no sign of hostility, no malice. Humanity had won, but they had no interest in further bloodshed. They were not conquerors in the traditional sense. No, they were something more: survivors, architects of their own destiny. The humans had won not by the strength of their weapons, but by the strength of their spirit. The Teverii kneeled, their once proud warriors broken and humbled before the very species they had sought to enslave. "Please," Krall said, his voice shaking. "We were wrong. We underestimated you. Please show us mercy." But humanity's message was clear. "You wanted us to kneel," General Kor said, standing tall and resolute. "Now you will beg for mercy." The Teverii delegation knelt before the human fleet, their bodies shaking under the weight of their defeat. Their towering forms, once symbols of unchallenged might, now seemed small and fragile as they bowed in submission. The silence that hung in the air was deafening, punctuated only by the low hum of the human ships in orbit. General Kor stood at the forefront of his fleet, his gaze unwavering. The Teverii had demanded that humanity bow, that they submit, but now, as the leaders of the Teverii begged for mercy, it was clear that the tables had turned. Humanity had triumphed, but Kor's eyes, though fierce with pride, held no sign of triumph in the traditional sense. He wasn't here for revenge. He wasn't here for vengeance. He was here because it was the only choice left. A part of Kor the strategist, the soldier, the human who had watched countless lives lost knew that mercy, in this moment, was not just a matter of compassion. It was a statement. A reminder that humanity had survived not by the edge of a blade alone, but by understanding when to strike and when to show restraint. It was the strength of knowing when to conquer and when to rebuild. He stepped forward, his boots echoing in the quiet of the ship's command center. The Teverii leaders, including Krall, lifted their heads slightly, their eyes hollow with defeat. They had come, expecting the worst. Expecting humiliation. Expecting the same ruthlessness they had shown the galaxy for centuries. But Kor's voice, when it came, was not one of hatred or anger. "You wanted us to kneel," Kor said, his tone cold yet controlled. "And when we didn't, you tried to break us. You underestimated us. But you forgot one thing humanity doesn't break. It adapts. It rises. And now we stand, not as your equals, but as the masters of our own destiny." Krall's eyes, once full of unshakable confidence, now reflected a deep, quiet fear. The realization that they had not only been defeated militarily, but had failed to break the spirit of those they had so long oppressed, was too much to bear. What will you do with us?" Krall's voice trembled. "We have nothing left. No fleet, no allies, no power. You've taken everything." Kor regarded the Teverii commander for a long moment. The war had cost him and his people dearly. They had fought for freedom, for survival, but at what cost? The losses were insurmountable. The cities lost. The lives taken. But humanity had endured. They had proven their resilience. And it was in that very resilience that Kor saw the true power of his people. "What will we do with you?" Kor echoed the question, his voice heavy. "You've asked for mercy. And we will show it. But understand this: the galaxy is no longer a place where your kind can rule through fear. You won't enslave any more species. You won't conquer any more planets. And you won't ever make the mistake of thinking humanity will bow before you again." Krall's chest heaved as he processed the words. A part of him wanted to argue, to lash out, to reclaim even a sliver of the power that had once been his. But deep down, he knew it was futile. The Teverii were no longer a threat. They were broken, fractured, and their empire was nothing but a shadow of its former self. We will accept your mercy," Krall whispered, his voice hoarse. "But the cost of our empire, it's too great. We have failed." Kor nodded, his eyes cold yet firm. "You have failed, Krall. But you don't have to disappear into oblivion. There is a place for you in this new galaxy. But you must live with the consequences of your actions. The power you once wielded is no longer yours to control." He turned away from the Teverii leaders, his mind already focused on the future. The fight for freedom, the struggle against oppression, it had been a defining battle for humanity, and it had been won. But the work didn't end here. Humanity had to rebuild. It had to forge new relationships with the other species of the galaxy, repair the damages of war, and above all, ensure that this victory was never forgotten. The Teverii would be offered a chance to rebuild as well. But not at the helm of an empire. They would be brought down from their pedestal and integrated into the galaxy as a humbled species, one among many. If they were lucky, they would learn from their mistakes. If they weren't, they would fade into obscurity, like so many before them. As the humans prepared to leave the Teverii world, the tension of war still lingered, but the weight of victory had shifted from the backs of the humans to the broken shoulders of the Teverii. The once proud empire now looked to humanity not with disdain, but with something far worse, a quiet, desperate hope that mercy would not be denied them. Weeks later, the galaxy would be forever changed. The remnants of the Teverii Empire were scattered and vulnerable, their leaders exiled and stripped of their former glory. The war that had raged for so long had ended, but the work of peace had only just begun. Humanity, having defeated an empire that once sought to crush them, now had to ensure that this victory didn't turn into yet another chapter of war. In the aftermath, General Kor would become a symbol not just of military strength, but of humanity's resolve. He would lead the efforts to create new alliances, to strengthen the fragile peace that had been forged in the fires of war. And though he would never forget the cost of that victory, the lives lost, the families torn apart, he would stand tall, knowing that humanity had earned its place among the stars. No longer would humanity bow to anyone. The Teverii, their empire broken, their pride shattered, began to rebuild. But in their rebuilding, they would not forget the lesson they had learned. They had learned what it meant to be truly defeated not through the strength of weapons, but through the will of a people who would never bow, who would never kneel. And so, the galaxy moved forward. A new chapter began. The voices of the oppressed, once silenced, now rang out with the power of their newfound freedom. Humanity had proven that they would not be ruled, that they would not be subjugated. And though the scars of war would remain, there was a quiet, unyielding strength in the knowledge that they had won not by force alone, but by their relentless pursuit of their destiny. The Teverii would be forced to live with the consequences of their actions, but the galaxy would move forward. And humanity, stronger, wiser, and ever resilient, would watch over it all, ensuring that no one, ever again, would be forced to kneel before another. In the weeks following the surrender of the Teverii, the galaxy shifted beneath the weight of humanity's actions. The Teverii, now a fractured remnant of their former self, had been pushed into the margins of galactic politics, their once proud fleets scattered and their territories dissolved. The peace that General Kor and his forces had so ruthlessly fought for was now a fragile, tenuous thing. While the human fleet basked in the glow of victory, the task of rebuilding the galaxy was far from over. The remnants of the Teverii would have to face their own reckoning, but humanity, too, had to determine its place among the stars. The first order of business was the formation of the Galactic Council. It would be humanity's voice among the many species that now looked to the future. But with that voice came great responsibility, and Kor understood this more than anyone. The political landscape was volatile, full of factions that sought to take advantage of the power vacuum left by the Teverei's fall. Even among their former allies, whispers of discontent had begun to surface. Some species in the galaxy resented humanity's sudden rise to power. To many, the swift and decisive victories that had defined humanity's rise felt more like an imposition than an opportunity for peace. To others, humanity's willingness to show mercy to the Teverii seemed like a sign of weakness, something that could be exploited in the future. But Kor was undeterred. He had seen the face of war, and he knew that the most dangerous thing was not the enemies you fought, but the disunity within your own ranks. "We've won the war," Kor said in a briefing to the council's newly formed leaders, his voice calm but stern. "But that doesn't mean the work is done. We have to maintain unity. We must show the galaxy that the old ways, the ways of subjugation, of war, of fear, are over. If we fail here, everything we've fought for will unravel." The council, a mixture of species and leaders from both the human and allied worlds, nodded in agreement. But while the sentiment was there, the challenges ahead were manifold. The greatest concern was how to integrate the Teverii into the new galactic order. Many of the smaller species that had once been oppressed by the Teverii Empire saw the Teverii survival as a threat, unwilling to accept them back into the galactic fold. They feared that, despite the Teverei's defeat, their militaristic culture would one day return, more dangerous than ever. "I suggest we push for a transitional period," suggested Chancellor Inara, a leader of one of the allied species who had fought alongside humanity during the war. "Perhaps allow them time to rebuild, but under our watch. If we let them rise too quickly, we risk provoking the same cycle of domination that got us into this mess in the first place." Kor sighed. He had anticipated this response. There were many voices calling for the complete annihilation of the Teverii, for their culture to be wiped from the galaxy entirely. But Kor knew this path would only sow more resentment, more bloodshed. The galaxy had already seen enough of that. "No," Kor said, his voice firm. "We won't eliminate the Teverii. If we do that, we become no better than they were. We will allow them to rebuild, but we will hold them accountable. We will establish firm limits on their power. We will make sure they never again have the chance to oppress others. But we will give them a chance to prove that they can be part of the galaxy's future." The room fell silent for a long moment, the weight of Kor's words settling over them like a cloud. Everyone understood the stakes, but the decision to show mercy was not one that would be easily accepted by all. Kor's gaze shifted to the holographic map before him, a projection of the galaxy's current state. It was divided, still scarred from the years of war, with colonies in ruins and entire planets still under military lockdown. The Teverii had controlled vast swaths of space, but now it was the humans who had the opportunity to set the course for the future. And Kor would not let that future be one of vengeance or tyranny. "There's another reason why we won," Kor continued, his voice softening, but carrying a profound weight. "We won because we didn't let the war consume us. We didn't let it turn us into what the Teverii were. We fought for our freedom, for the freedom of others, and we proved that no matter the size of the enemy, we would never kneel." He paused, looking out at the faces of his fellow leaders. "That's the message we have to send. And we have to send it loud and clear. To the Teverii. To everyone. To the galaxy." The word struck deep. But as the meeting came to a close, Kor couldn't help but feel the quiet dread that lingered in the back of his mind. Peace had been won, but the war for the soul of the galaxy had only just begun. While the humans had proven their strength, there were still factions, both within and outside their own ranks, who would never forgive them for their rise. They would always view humanity as a threat. And even now, there were other species who saw the weakness of the Teverii as an opportunity to rise. The fall of one empire could lead to the rise of another, and that was the last thing Kor wanted. The galaxy couldn't survive another round of bloody conquest. As if on cue, an alert flashed across the holoscreen in front of him. A transmission from the human colony on Zeta 9, a remote world at the edge of Teverii-controlled space. The message was brief but urgent. "General Kor, we need your help. A faction of Teverii loyalists has appeared. They're gathering, and they have advanced technology far beyond what we thought possible. We don't know where it came from, but we need your leadership." Kor's blood ran cold. Despite all their efforts to dismantle the Teverei's military capabilities, there were still remnants of their empire rogue elements that refused to submit. The Teverii loyalists were not simply survivors of the empire, they were determined to restore it, at any cost. The war, it seemed, was not truly over. The galaxy's fight for peace was far from finished. With a sharp nod, Kor turned to the council members who had gathered. "Prepare the fleet. It's time to show the galaxy that we won't just defeat those who oppress, we will prevent it from happening again. Let's remind them of what humanity can do." As Kor left the chamber, the weight of the galaxy's future pressed down upon him. The Teverii had begged for mercy, but mercy could not be shown to those who still sought to destroy the fragile peace they had built. Humanity had proven it was strong enough to stand tall, but now it had to prove that it was strong enough to protect that peace no matter the cost. And as the fleet assembled and prepared for another conflict, the message rang clear once again: they wanted us to kneel. Now they beg for mercy. But this time, we will show them that mercy is a privilege, not a right. And if they choose to fight again, they will know that they fight against the very will of the galaxy itself.